You'll find today that many men lament the state of their gender and blame feminists for this.
Ah, fucking feminists are making everything difficult. We cannot be human without them constantly. Oh, what? Hi guys. Hi. I totally wasn't blaming feminists for some problem that they caused. Definitely wasn't, no.
I think it's fascinating that they blame feminists. I think there's some interesting arguments to be had, but I don't think this is the direct influence on the current failures of the male gender.
Oh, really? We failed? How have we failed since we built this world? Mostly, but not entirely on our own. And all the problems we currently face, they're failings, are they? Not problems that we have to deal with? You know, like women have problems that they have to deal with. Nobody calls them failings.
Now, this is my opinion. There is some evidence to reflect what I think, but I'm not saying it's built in stone. It's more on the prejudice level of evil psych.
So, bullshit then.
Hello everyone, this is Champion Ugh! Damn it, I can't see a thing in this.
So, men in general, we know, are not doing as well as their female counterparts. They still have good positions in life, mainly because their forebears do.
So basically what you're saying is all the great positions that men find themselves in today are because they inherited them from their fathers and from their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers. Is that what you're saying? That this mythical patriarchy is also some kind of hereditary system where all the sons benefit from the fathers and nobody else does, despite the fact that most men are not born in a position where they can inherit anything at all and have to work their way up from the bottom to the top. I'm just saying these guys made it in spite of these failings and problems, just saying.
But in the current age, the average man is less likely to succeed in school, less likely to have a degree. People without degrees are less likely to make a lot of money. So now you might ask, why is that?
It couldn't possibly be because education is geared specifically towards girls, and as a direct side effect of this, the boys suffer because they're not meant to be the beneficiaries of said practice. The system is not geared to look after them, it's not geared to teach them properly, and let's not forget that a lack of male teachers nowadays is also making this worse, so boys are failing more so than girls, and also there's a lot of other shit, but I'm sure you're going to get into it.
Is it simply because the feminists have ruined traditional marriage and ruined our lives as a byproduct?
What? That has nothing to do with education. That's marriage and a completely separate issue, but do go on?
I don't think necessarily so. What has had a direct influence on it has been the decline of manual labor as a viable form of occupation for the man.
Okay, that might actually have some truth to it, but that is not the reason why they are failing in education. And thank you for clarifying that it is not marriage that is the reason why these kids are failing. We're talking about kids and young adults and young men who are in university, so to speak. You do realise that, right? Why do you think these people aren't getting the education that they deserve? Could possibly be because of some certain gendered ideas by a certain gender supremacy group, but I could be wrong. I'm an idiot. What do I know?
Compared to women, men have a much more competitive gender relationship. They're not cooperative. They are continually fighting with each other for hierarchy, for pecking order.
Wrong, 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 wrong. What you just said goes against all science. We are competitive. We occasionally fight each other. But look at the world around you, mate. Look at the computer that you're using to record your video with. That would not be around if it was not for the cooperation of men working in a lab or research facility, coming up with all the basic design functions to create this. Or in a university, coming up with the theory behind the electricity and the digital stuff. We are the only species on the planet where the male of the species do not go around killing each other and going "Murr!" puffing our chests up and going, I'm the dominant one, you stay down there and I have all the women. We cooperate, we build stuff together, we talk to each other, we like each other. Hell, we even love each other. We're a species where the father also has a role in the upbringing. Most species on Earth don't necessarily have that. You're wrong there. Sure, these things happen, but it's rare. This cooperation built all this shit. You are wrong there. I don't know who taught you that, but it's clearly wrong. Hell, the way you live your life is wrong. Do you go around constantly browbeating your own male friends and attacking them and competing with them? The only time you compete with them, it may be sports or maybe trying to, I don't know where you work. It could be sales. You're just trying to get more sales. It's that drive that has helped build all this. And do you think women aren't the same? Women are the same. In fact, they're probably worse in a lot of aspects when it comes to that shit. But hey, they're just angels, peace-loving people. We're just going to ignore that, aren't we?
This is like male roosters. They want to basically mate with the most attractive female, so they'll fight. You notice that hierarchy, specifically in its most masculine form in military hierarchy, is almost exclusively male.
I'm sorry, but to compare us to the rooster is just completely wrong. We are unlike any other animal species on the planet, like I just said. And in regards to the military, well, traditionally, because since the dawn of man, when we didn't have things like government-sponsored welfare and the pill, etc., etc., men had to go off and fight and protect the women because the women had babies, so they could no longer provide and maybe fight. I don't know what it would have been like in the Neolithic era if women did fight. I do know that they did provide and hunt with the men until they had to have babies. So apart from that, let's get back on point. It was up to the men because they were sadly more disposable than the women, who were, vital for the survival of the tribe and to the extension of the human race as a whole, although they didn't know that. The men had to fight, and this has stuck throughout the entirety of human history, apart from a few exceptions where women did fight, but that was very rare. Only since World War II have I noticed women have actual combat roles. The Soviet Union employed them as snipers and as guerrilla fighters. French resistance did the same, and since then we've seen women joining the army more and more and more. And only recently in America have they been granted combat roles. The reason why it's so male dominated because it was specifically designed for men to go off and fight, because we are the disposable gender, though technically not so much anymore. We now have the technology and the know-how for that no longer to be the case. It's not because men are competitive that we are such animalistic people that is the case. It's not because we're animals. It's because of social pressures from long ago that are stuck with us for some reason. That's it. That's why. That's literally the only reason. And there are women generals. There are women admirals, etc., etc. It's not entirely male dominated. It's just the fact that since men are usually the ones who have to go off and fight, that's the way it is. It's not sexism. It's not animal instinct. It's a social construct, I'd say. But I take that with a grain of salt, people. I'm not sure if that's the right word to use.
Men act like this. Men are very concerned with status and function in that sense.
Women also have hierarchies. Women are also very dominant and submissive with each other. Women also have that same group mentality as men do. In fact, it's probably even more so with them than it is for us. Have you not seen how high school girls work and how women in workplaces work with all the drama and shit that they always end up doing with each other? Look on the internet. Feminism is a prime example of that. Human beings as a whole are very hierarchical, and it doesn't particularly matter what your gender is because women can and have controlled men to do their bidding politically, socially, etc., etc. Doesn't matter. It's all about how strong you are, not just physically, but all these things I just mentioned: political, economical, etc., etc. Doesn't matter. As long as you're the top dog, that's all that matters. At least in terms of hierarchy.
And that doesn't lead to necessarily the best preservation of men as a species. We get this skewed phenomenon. People have talked about it before, but I don't think it's very well known, where there are a lot of people who are failures for men and a few that are very successful.
Men are not a species, they are a gender. Let's get that out of the way. And secondly, the way our brains work aren't necessarily causing us to drop out of universities and schools, are they? No, that's not the issue, because otherwise we would not have all of this. We would not have all these famous scientists and people who have basically been the bedrock of society, i.e. the working class who worked and toiled, etc., etc. Wouldn't have all that. Our brains aren't necessarily the problem. In fact, they aren't the problem. They're just not being nurtured and taught the way that women's brains are being taught, because teaching is a mental thing. You're teaching people and giving them information to pass on to the next generation and to use for the betterment of society and themselves. Am I right?
It's a very skewed curve. Women, by contrast, have a much more bell curve type distribution, where there's more kind of in the mediocre positive range, more in the mediocre negative range. It's not as extreme as men, which is a larger distribution. So I think this has a lot to do with our gender relations. Women in general are, in my opinion, more like flock animals. They tend to flock together, they tend to be more responsive to social pressures, and so they kind of conglomerate. Men, on the other hand, don't. And when you have an environment that isn't conductive necessarily to the male gender compared to the female one, this competition is a disadvantage.
I think you'll find that women's brain patterns in regards to IQ do not necessarily reflect the way they go into groups, because men also enjoy going into groups and forming groups and being with friends and forming societies. Well, they did help form this very society in which we live in. Humans in general are heavily dominated by groupthink and societal pressures. I think what you said about women is a bit of a generalization, and feminists would call that sexist. But again, you're right. You are right. We live in an era where this type of situation that men are in is not benefiting them because it's not geared towards them. Thank you for conceding that point, as I already mentioned before.
And there's a lot about the environment that isn't conducive to men right now. As I've said, sort of the masculine forms of labor, particularly industrial or skilled trades or particularly unskilled labor.
In regards to industrial jobs, women also did that during the Industrial Revolution and afterwards. It was only when they had children or when society began to move away from industry did that begin to change. But especially in Europe, I don't know what it was like in America. In my country, the United Kingdom, women who were working class worked in the factories and they worked unskilled or skilled jobs that perhaps are no longer done anymore by people, but by machines, or not by very many. It's not just men that are affected, but it seems to be men that are disproportionately affected by this. But again, this does not mean that men are failing, because there are more men, because men are also employed in other tertiary industry jobs that women are. It's just that they choose different areas of that. You do realise that, right? And despite that, men work more, therefore they earn more. So it's not necessarily the change in jobs over the last 50 years that is affecting men. It's something else, isn't it?
This used to be a viable form of work, but mechanization has continually eroded what we would consider to be skilled labor, and we've had to deal with less and less money as a result of it.
But men are working the same jobs as women, mostly, in regards to these tertiary industry areas. Society has shifted from an industry base to a service base. Men have not been left behind in regards to that. Some men have been left behind, and that's horrible, and that's a result of terrible economic planning on the part of governments. But that is not the reason why the male gender is failing, as I've already said. Men are able to do these jobs. Men are able to still out-earn women, despite the fact that they have lost income as a result. Even though these industry jobs, these skilled jobs, weren't particularly high paying in the first place. And it's simply the fact that we work more. We want to do more. Because of that competitive edge, we've not lost it. So your point is again mute. And also, more men work in the STEM fields rather than women, who tend to work in these service jobs, these social work jobs, etc., which also exacerbates this pay gap the feminists like to spout. It's just an earnings gap and can be certified through, well, you guys know. I've already gone on about it. Next.
More people have to get university degrees, and men aren't very good at education of this sort.
But men are working the same jobs as women, mostly, in regards to these tertiary industry areas. Society has shifted from an industry base to a service base. Men have not been left behind in regards to that. Some men have been left behind, and that's horrible, and that's a result of terrible economic planning on the part of governments. But that is not the reason why the male gender is failing, as I've already said. Men are able to do these jobs. Men are able to still out-earn women, despite the fact that they have lost income as a result, even though these industry jobs, these skilled jobs, weren't particularly high paying in the first place. And it's simply the fact that we work more. We want to do more. Because of that competitive edge, we've not lost it. So your point is again mute. And also, more men work in the STEM fields rather than women, who tend to work in these service jobs, these social work jobs, etc., which also exacerbates this pay gap the feminists like to spout. It's just an earnings gap and can be certified through, well, you guys know. I've already gone on about it. Next.
There's a lot who are, by our standards, would be considered very dumb or prone to fighting. That thing.
What, so men can't do these degrees because there are a lot of men who are idiots and are prone to fighting, even though men don't actually fight each other that much? Fighting is a very rare occurrence in society. I'm just saying, violence levels are an all-time low in our society for once, and that's across the board. So therefore they cannot do these degrees. That's even more sexist than what you just said before.
Now there's the other thing, is that men have been targeted by most forms of vices. Men seem to be particularly conductive to vices. They are always interested in women. They're very interested in alcohol.
You do realise that some men are gay. They're not all interested in women, and not all men drink. And women also drink a lot, a hell of a lot in fact. I've met a lot of women who drink a hell of a lot of booze, or can drink more than I can.
They're typically the primary consumers of drugs and video games and computers.
None of those things are particularly bad things, nor do they point to some kind of failure in men. But since you mentioned video games, I'm not surprised you consider that a failing. And where are statistics showing that we are the primary takers of drugs and alcohol? I'm going to have to bring out my citation needed card on that one.
This seems to target all facets of the demographic. Men in general are less risk adverse, so they're more interested in taking risks. They're more interested in gambling. Drugs provide the highest payoff, so men are more conducive to that. They're not interested in social mores.
Still doesn't explain the high amount of women who take drugs. I'd agree that men are more risk averse, which is why they are more competitive and why they succeed more and get higher paid jobs as a result and negotiate higher wage packages, but it doesn't quite explain drugs. I think humans just enjoy taking that shit, and that's men and women when I mean humans, by the way. I've seen, and this is probably anecdotal, so you can dismiss it, I don't care, but I've seen just as many women take drugs and alcohol as men. I don't think risk has much to do with it. I don't think people particularly care about that.
And another thing is that the intelligence spectrum of men are interested in sort of very structural mechanical behavior, and computers and video games are a very high emulation of this, probably the most gamey, exciting form of it you'll ever find. So basically all strata of the male gender is being targeted by vices.
This is sounding very much like a religious argument. Vices and virtues and all that bullshit. Seriously, all men are being targeted by this? Most men don't take drugs. Most men definitely do drink, but then again, there's billions of men out there where drinking is forbidden. I don't know if they're necessarily the majority or not, but the fact remains is, most men drink, but that does not affect their ability to function in society. That does not affect us as a gender. That is not the issue as to why men are failing in certain areas. It's all societal. It has nothing to do with drugs. It has nothing to do with alcohol. These are all separate issues, but these are affecting humans, not men as a whole.
Women, on the other hand, although they're increasingly turning to vices as they're becoming more masculinized.
I'm sorry, but women have always taken drugs, always drank. They are not getting more masculinized. In fact, it's feminists and society as a whole that are trying to feminize men, actually. But hey, whatever, apparently women are getting masculinized. And they've never ever had an aversion to vices. They've never had an aversion to drugs and alcohol and failure. They've never failed in their lives. It's just men. Incredible. Have you been living in a rock for 100 years, mate? I'm just wondering.
They don't have it down as much, and generally they engage in social behavior. They go outside. They still have to live in the real world, which a lot of men are increasingly marginalized out of.
Citation needed. Just because men play video games does not mean they are being marginalized out of the real world. Men have to face the real world on a daily basis, which is why a lot of men are killing themselves. Why are you treating women like they're these some kind of very mature, always morally right, always doing the right thing, realistic, and men are not, when really it's a spectrum that all humans are on. Men aren't as more realistic or less realistic than women, and vice versa, okay? Women are not superior than men in this regard. There are certainly things that men and women do individualistic, that you could say they're more geared towards, but you're not actually arguing that. You're arguing bullshit things that you cannot actually prove and using science in an arse backwards way.
Men also have smaller social networks, so unlike women who still can survive in the float no matter how bad things go in terms of relationships, in terms of getting a job, men, if you're on the internet and if you're into vices, which means you're antisocial, which means you don't develop your personality, means you're going to be a basement dweller, and basement dwellers are not going to succeed in life compared to socialized normies.
That is absolute bullshit. You have no way you can prove that. Men are more socially awkward than women. You know, it's true that there are more men who are autistic than women. That doesn't mean that women don't suffer from it and aren't like that. You're saying that women are more normal, more neurotypical. Is that what you're trying to say? That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. There are just as many men who are like that than women. Always has been the case. And just because these people are socially awkward doesn't mean that they won't succeed in life. Because a lot of them tend to have genius level intellect. And they're very highly educated. Totally not talking about myself. But that's besides the point. Men, in general, have quite normal social circles. They don't tend to be as socially isolated, simply because this certain amount of men tend to suffer from a particular social thing more than women do. That does not mean that all men are like this. This affects the whole male gender. I'm gonna have to say again, citation fucking needed. But then what does that say about women? They choose low-paying jobs, low-paying degrees that don't actually actually bring a lot to the table in regards to society and jobs on purpose. On purpose. They choose to do that. What does that say about them? I'm just saying, for the sake of argument, what does that say about them? If men are like that, what does that make women? Because that sounds pretty similar to me.
In case you don't know, a normie is a term from the internet. You'll learn someday. Anyway.
It means you're a normal person, and he's basically saying that women are normal persons more than men are when it's not the case, okay? There you go. You've learned it from me, in case you don't know. But hey, you all know, guys. But I'm just saying it for the people who don't know, alright?
We're talking about men as a gender, and there are a lot of reasons why we're not succeeding, and it's not about blaming women. It's about our place in the world and how it's increasingly becoming less necessary.
If we're becoming less necessary, how come feminists are still asking for our help? How come we still do all the dangerous jobs that women do not do, no matter how mechanized they are? Are you sure we're not necessary? I don't think that's the problem as to why a lot of men are failing. We're not failing as a gender, it's just that increasingly a lot of men are failing, not the gender. You're using this stupid feminist claptrap and it's making you almost misandrist to your own gender, and it's weird.
We don't live in a world where we're constantly at war. We don't live in a world where people are men who have to do everything. A lot of things have already been invented, so it's not like great geniuses necessarily have the place they once had.
We're living in a world where there's a war going on right now in the Middle East, which was caused by religion, by Western intervention, by all sorts of bullshit stretching back to nearly 100 years ago. We have been in a constant state of war. The United States especially has been in a constant state of war for 200 years. It was only a couple of months ago that Britain hadn't been at war for like 100 years or something ridiculous like that. We are constantly at war. There are wars and skirmishes and all sorts of insurrections that are going on all the bloody time. Geniuses still hold an incredibly important part in our society. They are the ones that are going to take us to Mars. They're the ones who are going to sort out climate change. These are the people who are going to sort out economic problems, and a lot of them are going to be men. You are lying. Oh, and by the way, men still have to do a lot of the dangerous work. As I said, all that shit that you just completely and utterly dismissed in the middle of that. As a quick aside, and I know this is dragging on people, I'm sorry, it's a long one, but who's going to be fighting all these wars? It's going to be 90-odd% men.
There's this vast network now that we're a globalized society, so your contribution as a man is less important in many ways.
Why? Then surely, by that standard, women aren't as important. In fact, it's the opposite. Everyone is now more important because we're now globalised and are working increasingly towards a greater good for the planet. Surely, we are more important as the human race. Do you not listen to yourself? That's stupid.
And we're diminished as a gender.
By that logic, so are women.
It's unfortunate. It's just a fact of life. You can talk about feminism. I'm not very strong one way or the other. I think it's interesting, but there are much more critical reasons for our declining success than just blaming the fact that we can't get laid.
Are you sure you don't believe one way or another? Because you sound like a feminist. Because that bit at the end, that's exactly what they say. Never mind the fact that I bring up the fact that education is geared towards women, that we still do all these things, we've done all these things, that we're not like this, we're more like that. The globalization is affecting everyone. It's the fact that we can't get laid. That's it, isn't it? You know what, I'm done with this video. I've said all I need to say. I'd probably just repeat myself ad nauseum. See you later, guys.